Great. So welcome, everyone. I am Laura Lee. I'm the Director of Grantmaking at the Maine Community Foundation, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Sherry Gallion, MaineCF Director of Strategic Learning, who will be helping me when we get to the Q&A period and during. So like I said, if you'd like to use the chat box to introduce yourself and your organization, please go ahead and do so. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function. If it's a really direct, simple question, you can type it in there. If Sherry knows the answer, she'll just respond to you as we go along. If not, we'll leave it to the end. She can read it off to me. If you have a little bit more complicated question or you don't feel like typing, just use the raise hand function. And what we'll do is just, take those in order at the end of the presentation. And in the next week, we'll also email you a slideshow, the slides that I'm using, and a link to today's recording, so you don't have to feel any pressure to, write everything down. Okay, so let's see. Let me advance my slides. Okay, so our agenda for today, I'm just going to do a kind of general applying for grants, couple of comments, and then give you an overview of the Maine Community Foundation and our approach to grant making, and then go into some more really like nuts and bolts around applying for grants at the Community Foundation and touch on those topics I have listed there. So first, we're going to climb up to Mount Kineo and get a little perspective. So just to say that applying for grants is one strategy for raising funds for your organization, and not necessarily the best one, and not necessarily, and certainly not the most reliable. And to back that up, this is some data from the Maine Philanthropy Center based on 2019 data from Maine. And it's just to really show and make the point that individuals do the majority of charitable giving, 57% in 2019. And if you combine that with bequests, and they used here the national average of 10%, so that's living and deceased individuals making up 67% approximately of total giving. So just to give you a sense of where charitable dollars are primarily coming from, foundations contribute just over a quarter of overall giving, and corporations, I believe they use the national average of 5% there. So the point is, just grants should not be your only strategy. Other ways of raising money may be better and require less time and be more consistent and reliable. And I'm thinking about individual donations, memberships, fees for service, events, though I know events have not been easy to do in the last couple of years. So the important thing is just to make sure you diversify your revenue streams so that if one dries up, you'll have others that you can rely on. And it shows funders that your organization is healthy and stable. So with that caveat aside, you may still very well want to apply for grants. And if you do, I just want to make sure you know about these great resources that we have here in Maine, the Maine Philanthropy Center and the Maine Association of Nonprofits, or MAMP. And so I listed there the different kind of resources that they have available, so you can explore their websites. One thing I couldn't fit on the Maine Philanthropy Center list was they have a wonderful Giving in Maine report that has lots of really interesting information about different foundations in Maine. So it's really important to take advantage of these resources and do your research, because foundations are diverse. They have their own cultures, norms, goals, strategies, and populations that they focus on. And we don't need to kind of get into the weeds about it, but just know that there are varied sources of the money or funding that they have, and that the source of that is reflected in how they operate and their structures. So the one major thing to point out, I guess, is that private foundations have one financial source from an individual or a family or a corporation. And I think about it as one pot of money. By contrast, community foundations are public charities that have broad public support from individual donors. So they pool many pots of money into one big pot from many different community members. So that's one way to think about it. So I will then give you an overview of the Maine Community Foundation. So we are a statewide community foundation, and our mission is to work with donors and other partners to improve the quality of life for all Maine people. And we are constantly working to build philanthropic resources across the state. So the numbers that you see here, you know, those plus signs are always changing, usually getting bigger across the years. We were founded in 1983, and we have a professional staff of 41 people and growing. We are headquartered in Ellsworth. We have an office in Portland and remote staff in Dover, Foxcroft, Mars Hill, and Rockport. Of course, a lot of us are remote, and I am remote myself right now from Brunswick. So we also have a volunteer board of directors from across Maine and a network of more than 500 volunteer community advisors. And so you see at the top there, number of funds. So we have over 2,000 funds. So that's what I mean about lots of, you know, pots, and the pots here are funds that get pooled together and into that large asset pool of over $650 million. So one thing to know about the funds is that there are 5 different types of funds that we have that make up that over 2,000 different funds. There are scholarship funds, donor advised funds, agency funds, designated funds, and field of interest funds. So you probably know some of those. Scholarship and donor advised. Agency funds, some of you might know of nonprofit agency funds are can be for an endowment or long-term savings for a nonprofit, and it's a great way to take advantage of the investments of a large asset pool like ours and the administrative oversight that we can provide. So that's a great service that we give to nonprofits, and I can connect you if you'd like to learn more about it. Designated funds are really for one or more, a small number of nonprofits. It's often a fund that gets created when a donor dies and wants to continue to support an organization that they might have been supporting throughout their life. So those grants sort of go directly every quarter to those organizations that have funds that are specifically designated for them. And then field of interest is really just limited to a specific location or an interest area like the arts or the environment. So those are often our funds that are being used for our competitive grant programs. So, and then you can see on those other numbers from 2020, just to give you a sense, you know, for our competitive grant programs, we gave out $4 million. We gave out almost $3 million in scholarships. But look at the donor grants, 27 million. So they kind of dwarf us. And I will talk more about our donor advised grants later, and total grants going out that year. And this was definitely impacted by the pandemic, over 50 million. Okay, so just give you also a sense of our approach to grant making. At the Community Foundation, we see nonprofits as critical partner. You know, we really cannot do our work without you. And we really value the hard work that you do to make life better in Maine. So we're also committed to partnering with communities, and that's why we have advisory communities that are made up of community members making decisions for almost all of our grant programs. So it's great to partner with community members who then bring local knowledge as well as sometimes content expertise for depending on the grant program. So in terms of our values and practices, equity is our core value that informs our grant making and all our programmatic work. We practice equity through consistency, trying to be sure that we're using the same standards to evaluate applications, regardless of who's reviewing them and who is applying. Accessibility, we want to be accessible to a broad range of organizations, from tiny grassroots organizations run by volunteers after they do their regular jobs to, larger organizations that have professional grant writing staff. We also strive for transparency to make all aspects of our grant making clear and visible to community members. And trust is, trusting our nonprofit partners in terms of doing what you say you're going to do, not second guessing on intentions, on commitment, or on, for example, the amount of money requested. So those, we're really committed to these values, and it's what's motivating this information session, our ongoing work throughout the year, for staff to be providing support and assistance where needed, and keeping these in mind as we do all other aspects of our work. Okay, so now I'm going to sort of get more into the nuts and bolts section of this presentation. And before I go over some of the topics, I just wanted to show you where to find this information on our website so that you can find it on your own. I know that our website can be hard to navigate, and if you don't sort of know where things are already. So I wanted to just help with that, because a lot of the things I'm presenting are really on our website and accessible. So, but I know it can be hard to find. So just want to give you a little bit of orientation. This is a screenshot of our homepage. And so you want to find that grants link in that green banner. So there's a red down arrow pointing to grants right there. And if you hover on that, you'll see that drop down menu will appear. And the first link, available grants and deadlines, will take you to a page that has a list of all of our current competitive grant programs. It'll have like a sentence description of each of them. And if you scroll further down, all of the programs are sorted by deadline so that you can see clearly how they are spread out across the year. And then each grant program name will be a link that you can then access a specific page and have more details about that grant program. And I'll show you an example of one of those pages later. The second link, help for applicants, when you hover on that, it will make that other drop-down menu appear to your right. And there you'll see important, I think, ones there are the eligibility and grant guidelines. And I'll go over eligibility, but there's a whole sort of section of like kind of frequently asked questions or topics that are there as grant guidelines that I think are helpful. And then fiscal sponsorship has a lot more information than I will be going over today. So just to give you a sense of how to find some good information on our website. So in terms of who is eligible to apply, I literally copied and pasted this from that eligibility section of our website. And just to say that, not everyone or every organization is eligible to apply to our competitive grant program. So, it is limited. Individuals can apply, for-profit businesses can apply, organizations with different tax statuses cannot apply. So it's really these, but nonprofits, 501c3s, and other types of organizations that are listed here. These are the ones that are eligible. If you have any questions or you're not sure, you can certainly contact us and we can work with you to clarify that. In terms of fiscal sponsorship, so if you have a group, in your community or something, and you are doing something that has a clear, charitable purpose, you have an established advisory board or oversight committee that is not like your mom and your cousin and your brother, and you don't have an assigned tax status, then you would be eligible to apply to one of our competitive grant programs with a fiscal sponsor. So that would be, the fiscal sponsor would be one of those eligible organizations who you have a relationship with. So it's something that you need to establish and you have a relationship, and they are willing to take on the responsibilities of being a fiscal sponsor. And so if you have that set up, then we have a agreement form that would be required to submit when you submit the application. So again, I would go, if this is, applies to you or your situation, I would go to that part of our website. There's a lot more information there that you can look at, and certainly contact us if you have more questions. So in terms of our grant programs, in 2022, we will have 21 grant programs available. There are currently 4 open: PF Fund for Baldwin, the Hospice Fund, which is restricted to Southern Maine or York and Cumberland counties, our BIPOC Fund, and Community Building, which is our largest and broadest grant program. So as I mentioned, each grant program has its own web page. So here I'm showing a screenshot of what our community building page looks like as an example. So any important announcements or resources will be right at the top, usually in red. And here you'll see we had a webinar or info session that maybe some of you attended in December. So there is the recording of that there along with the slides. We also have a document of all the application questions, including some additional guidance. And we've translated that for the first time this year. So we're very excited into Arabic, French, and Spanish. So those are available here, as well as a frequently asked questions document. And then on the left side, you'll see a quick overview section that has important information, such as the maximum award amount, when the application will be open, the deadline, when you should be notified, and the staff contact, along with some other information. And then on the right side is statistics from the last grant cycle. So this information is provided for each grant program at the top of the page. And then if you scroll down on each page, there'll be more information about the specific program criteria, priorities, types of funding, and other important info. So it's really important to look at the details of a grant program to make sure that your organization or your project is a good fit. And if you are at all unsure, I would encourage you to reach out to the appropriate staff. And I wouldn't assume that the programs stay the same from year to year. So definitely check back before applying. We are constantly making improvements. And so it's just good to check back just to make sure. And one of the big changes that has been happening across quite a few of our grant programs in the last year and a half is the addition of general support grants. So that's been a bigger change. Okay, so if you have decided to apply to one of our grant programs, then just want to show you quickly how to access our online application. So even though we have that Word document that you can use to sort of see all the questions ahead of time, if you want to work on it, separately and save it separately ahead of time, you can do that, but you cannot submit the Word document as your application. You have to submit an application online. So the way you access our system is from our homepage. On the top right, you'll see those 3 buttons, and you want to click on the gold apply button. And then it will take you to this page where you will want to go on the online grant application side, click on apply here, and that will take you to this page. So if you have been in our system before in the last year, like since, I think it's new since after July 2020, you'll want to log in and use the email that you've used before. If you forgot your password, there's of course a link for, forgot your password and resetting it. If it's your first time doing an application with us, then you'll want to click on the register link, and you'll need to create an account. And you can create an account using your name and email address, or by using one of your social media accounts. And then I've circled in red there right in the middle, click here, we have step-by-step instructions on how to start a new grant application. So there's screenshots and it's really clear. So it gives you more details on sort of navigating our online system. And just so you know, you can save your work and come back to it later. You can also add collaborators who can also edit the documents. So if you have, a group of folks who are working together on an application, you don't have to work separately in a Word document. You can get it in there and set it up, and all be contributing in the online system. So I can't resist just throwing in some grant writing tips here. Just briefly, if you are applying for grants, you likely are applying for more than one, and probably ones from, different foundations. And so, there's a lot of similar information that, different foundations will ask for. And so common elements might be, your organizational mission and history, major programs, operating budget, key staff and their skills, a list of board members, your EIN number or your IRS eligibility letter. So you can just do yourself a favor and assemble all of this information in advance. Organize it in a folder on your computer so that you can just pull it up as needed, and you will be really happy when you can feel like you're ahead of the game. The other thing to do, especially if you're applying for different grant programs or different foundations, is to really make sure you follow directions, read all the guidelines carefully, and make sure you do everything that's required. And don't submit things that aren't required unless you check with the funder first and get permission. And certainly call the funder if you are unsure of something, or if you have questions, don't be afraid to talk to them. And I would make sure to write in a style that is simple and direct. So I don't assume that the person reading your proposal knows anything about your mission or your community or your project. And I would say maybe especially for us, because we have reviewers, and also sometimes we share with donors, it's entirely possible that even if the staff person running that program or staffing that committee knows your organization and you really well, it's very possible that the person who's doing the actual review, or it might be shared with the donor, won't. So you just really want to make sure that you are thinking that it's not somebody who already knows you. And sort of similarly, try not to use jargon or special words in your field that people outside of your field wouldn't know. Certainly spell out abbreviations, and have somebody else proofread it if possible to correct any errors. You want to be as specific as you can. So, use numbers, percentages, any specific data that you have, so that it can be more specific. Don't be fancy, be prepared. So that just means don't use big words or hire writers that don't understand your work. Strong proposals are made of good ideas, lots of planning, and careful work. So just, and just a aside here, funders are really looking for signs of organizational capacity or ability. From the funding perspective, grants are not charity. Grants are investments in organizations and projects that are doing the work and having the impact that is aligned with the foundation's mission and goals. So, funders are not generally giving away money just for fun. They are giving it away for specific purposes, to address some specific concern or something that they think is really important. So it's just really imagining what you think you would want to know if somebody asked you to support their work. So that's just a few tips for you as you write your grants. So, okay, so you've done your grant application, you've submitted it, and then you are waiting. And you are probably wondering, what is taking so long? So to give you a sense of what is happening on our end after you submit your application, here is a breakdown of our process. So first, there's our intake by our grants administrative staff that are doing the due diligence and cross-checking names and addresses and making sure the application is complete in terms of required signatures and forms. Then there's a sort of screening or pre-screening process by program staff, reviewing proposals and making sure that they are meeting the grant program criteria. The giving together process, which I will still get to, is about sharing with donors. And then the review process, where the program staff would assign proposals to our volunteer reviewers, who then need to read and sometimes make phone calls to applicants, and then write up a summary and recommendation. And then they come with those to the decision meetings where they present their summaries and recommendations. There's discussion, and final award decisions are made as a committee through consensus. And then there's, again, the administrative work of processing all the letters and checks. So we have, even though we've had a online system, you submit your application online, we have always done notification by hard copy letter and a physical check, of course, if you get a grant. So one thing, I can't promise you this, but one thing I'm working on is doing some notifications through our online systems so that you would get an email through the system. And also, of course, if you log back into the system, you could see the status of your proposal. And so that way we wouldn't actually send a physical letter if it was a decline. But of course, we would still need to send a physical check. So the next frontier would be ACH, electronic transfer of funds, but that's we're not there yet. So for now, we would certainly need to send a physical check, but this way, if we notified you by email or through the system, you would know that you have gotten an award, and then you would know to look for the check. So we can sometimes have, physical checks out there that don't get found, or, people didn't know they were coming. So it can be quite a problem. So anyway, so that's something we're working on. In terms of the time lengths, how fast really depends on how big the grant program is. We sort of aim for at most 10 to 12 weeks. And, sometimes if it's a smaller grant program, it's faster than that. And community building, being our largest grant program, is closer to the max of that, I would say. And that's because we get over 400 applications from all across the state. We're managing 15 committees, and last year gave out 178 awards from those committees. So usually notifications are going out in early to mid-May. So that's the overall process. And then let me go back now to Giving Together, which I've mentioned a couple times. And Giving Together is the name of our program and is our partnership with donors. So we share proposals that we receive with donors at the beginning of our grant cycle. And, I shared the large number of donor grants. So there are most, I would say, of our donors are just making their own grants to organizations that they know. And a much smaller percentage of them are interested in hearing about, new projects, new organizations, things that are coming in through through our competitive grant programs. And we're sharing things, sharing proposals that we, have a hunch, knowing their interests, that they might be interested in. So there's multiple sort of purposes that are being served here. We're providing a service to our donors by helping them connect to projects and organizations that they are interested in supporting. We're providing more financial support for nonprofits by connecting, you to this additional funding that we wouldn't have had, if we didn't have this sort of additional support. And then, of course, our advisory committees are really happy because then their grant budgets, can go further. So it is a win-win-win. And you can see on these tables that the amount that has been awarded by donors and this is just 2 proposals that have come into our competitive grant programs, has more than doubled since 2017. You'll also see a kind of dip down in 2020, and that was really, I believe, a result of COVID. The community building applications came in right after, they were written before the pandemic, and then they were being reviewed sort of in the middle of that beginning of the pandemic. And so we had a very shortened cycle. There was not a lot of time for donors to participate. And also we really encourage donors to just give directly to nonprofits in their communities, to nonprofits that were, providing COVID relief. So the number of donor grants sort of overall that year were high, but the ones that were being, matched to proposals in our competitive pools was not as high as normal. But you can see they were really up last year. So just in terms of how, it works, like how you would experience it, for most of our grant programs, proposals that meet the grant program criteria would be added to an online donor portal that we have for our donors to review and consider funding. Staff contacts are also sharing proposals of interest directly with donors who may not, choose to use that online portal. And then donors, might partially or fully support a proposal. And just note that the proposals that staff determines are not eligible because they aren't meeting our eligibility guidelines or the grant program criteria will not be shared with donors. So when a donor makes a grant, we will immediately send a letter and check to the recipient organization by regular mail. So this is a little bit different. We've changed this in the last couple of years. So that's kind of like 2 parallel processes happening at the same time. And what this means is that you could receive a check in the mail before even your proposal is being reviewed by the committee for that grant program. If your request was partially funded by a donor, the review committee will still consider supporting the remaining balance. And so you might get a check from a donor early on, and then later, some time will pass, and later, after the committee has had the time to meet, you may get another check for the balance of your request. If your request was fully funded by a donor, it's really not likely that the committee will provide funding because they most likely will take that opportunity to fund other proposals. The other thing that can happen is that donors might choose to support your proposal after the committee has met. So we are going to leave proposals in this portal and available to donors, for a longer period of time. So our grant cycle will, sort of end for the committee will meet and make decisions, but some donors may still see your proposal and choose to provide some support. And so what that means is that there could be this really confusing situation where you receive a decline from the review committee, but then later receive a grant from a donor, support from a donor. So it's also less likely, but entirely possible. And I know this has happened. I've seen it happen. You can receive a grant from the committee and still receive a donor grant later, and so therefore receive additional money above and beyond the requested amount. And so just a quick note for out of cycle requests, which is like if you have something going on that maybe doesn't fit into one of our grant programs, or for whatever reason is really urgent or timely, then I would just say, the best way to access our donors is through this process and through applications to our competitive grant programs. But of course, I understand there are situations where they're not fitting with one of our competitive grant programs. And in that case, contacting the appropriate staff, so the staff person that's assigned to your county where your organization is located would be the person to reach out to. So we also try to accommodate that as well. And lastly, if you are lucky enough to get a grant, we will ask you to complete a grant report about a year after you get the award. You just go back into the online system, and if you haven't done one of our grant reports in the last year, we did do a major overhaul and we really simplified the form. So we've been getting really positive feedback that it's very easy and does not take a lot of time. And I would think about it too as if you're not done, it does not have to be a completion report. It can simply be a progress report or update sort of where you are at that time, because I know a lot of people have been reporting delays, of course. So that's understandable. And just so you know, Sherry is working on, we are working together on, providing more learning opportunities. And so she's working on a report on the 2021 grant reports, which are reports of 2020 grants, and that should be coming out this month. And so we're really excited about that, and hope that will show those who submitted those reports that they are not going into a black hole, not at all. Sherry is reading every single one of them and coding them, as well as, of course, the staff that it went to. So anyway, that's something else that will be coming out soon. And so lastly, I just wanted to share staff contacts with you. And these are just, the committees are for the current grant program. So the county locations, that's for the community building grant program. It's organized geographically. And there have been some staffing assignment changes recently. We have a new program officer, Ikhlas Ahmed, who will be staffing Cumberland and Southern Midcoast, but she's not on here yet because she's very new and not ready yet to be fielding questions. So, but she will be training and up to speed soon. So for those of you in those counties, she'll be a great contact for you. And just in terms of when it might be great to contact a staff member, applicants, before you submit an application is a great time. If you have a question about, alignment with criteria or something like that, that's a great time. It's not required, but that's a nice time to contact staff if you have questions. When you receive a decline letter is also a great time to contact staff. You can learn about the process, about if there are ways that you could strengthen your application in the future. Just know that sometimes there is some, feedback that staff have to share. Sometimes it just is really that it was super competitive, and we often don't have just enough money to fund really worthy proposals. And then the last time, of course, is if you have a grant and there's some kind of significant change that comes up, that's another time you may want to be in touch. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here today, spending some time. And I know some people may need to jump off, so I just wanted to say thank you, and also that we really welcome your feedback. I'd love to hear from you. And, even like little things there, we have too many grant programs and too many web pages to keep track of everything. There can certainly be errors or just things that we didn't catch or that we didn't realize is not clear. So if you run into things on our application, on our web pages, anywhere, really, feel free to send us an email. And if it's an easy fix, we are really happy to do that and appreciate that. So Let's jump into some questions. And if you have, any questions about information I shared, please go ahead, raise your hand or put it into the Q&A. We'll call on you. If you have something more complicated about your situation or your organization, I think probably following up with one of the appropriate staff members would be the best. So, so let's go ahead and I'll turn it over to Sherry to either give me a question or tell me who has a question and we can unmute you.
So I have a few written questions ready and waiting. No one has raised their hand yet, so feel free to, if you'd like to ask one out loud, but this is just a quickie to get us started. Someone asked in the chat, are the logins individual, the grant application logins, are they individual or by organization?
I believe they're individual. So they're tied to your email address, which is why you need to use the same email address when you log in subsequent times. So yeah, so that it means that, right, if there's been a staffing change, then we can switch that over, but yes, it is by individual email address.
Great, thanks. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. This one I was going to answer myself in typing, and then I realized other people might have the same question, so we should do it live. So this organization is a volunteer organization, volunteer only, and they're confused about how to answer the question in the organizational overview where they need to name their CEO, president, or lead officer. They have a steering committee, but no officers, and there is someone who's the project lead.
Well, that's very democratic of you. But yes, somebody I think needs to be so I guess this is like separate from the grant contact. So, of course we need somebody who we're going to be able to be in contact with about the application. If we have questions, that will be the person that we are sending, the check to, if there's an award. So we definitely need that person. And then for the CEO, I mean, I would just, I don't know, pick a stick of straw or something. I mean, somebody's got to just be able to say, like, if there's a question or whatever, it can be just helpful to have. So I'd say just it's not important who it is, but that somebody can step into that role. Great. So that we have like the contact.
Yeah, and a second question from that same person, which is how to complete the operating budget when I think they're saying they have no revenues and no real expenses. But if they leave things blank, then their application is showing as only partially completed.
Yeah, I think that, like, if you're brand new and so you don't have, I thought there was some instruction there, but I believe it's that, if you're brand new and so you don't have like last year's fully completed financial information, I believe it's what you anticipate for your budget in the coming year. Sherry, do you think that's right?
I think that's right. If you anticipate there's going to be revenue, sometimes there are some organizations that apply that just are all volunteer and don't have any revenue or expenses. And I think you can just put 0 in. I've definitely, you can just go with plain old 0. Okay. Next one is, do you diminish your chances with individual grants by applying to several for the same issues? I think that means several grant programs, probably. Can you apply to multiple grant programs for the same project is how I'm interpreting that.
Yeah, and I forgot to say that that's such a good basic question. And our rule is 1 application per organization per grant program per year. So that means you can apply to multiple grant programs as long as, assuming you're eligible and you fit the criteria, even if they're on the same deadline. And I would say, in terms of the same, applying for the same thing, I I think that's okay, as long because you're going to say in your application, that you might have a pending, possible funding from these different sources. So you will be indicating that you're applying, and and we understand that an individual grant program is certainly not enough to supply all the funding for a project. So if there are more than one and you're needing some additional funding and it really is a good fit, then I don't see any problem with that. And we're not sort of like looking across grant programs and saying like, oh, if you got a grant here, like you're not going to get the grant here. So we're not actually that coordinated. So they're really happening in these sort of separate processes. And our feeling is like, it's looked at in that individual process. And if you get multiple grants, then good for you. And people do, and organizations are getting, multiple grants. I don't know if it's multiple grants for the same project. That would be a little bit more than I know right now, but I think it's certainly possible.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm going to do one more from the Q&A, and then I see a hand up. So from the Q&A, is your chance to receive a grant increased when a nonprofit is aligned in the projects with a municipality? So I think if a project is being sort of co-worked on by a municipality and the nonprofit.
Oh, well, I'd say that having a strong community partner is always a plus. I think that a lot of our grant programs, is for work being done in a community, and having the partnership and backing or of the municipality itself can be really helpful. So I would say yes, that's great. It's not necessarily I would just say that people, our advisors and reviewers, would certainly recognize that as a real positive to that proposed project.
Okay, I have Christopher Olson has his hand up. So Christopher, I'm going to unmute you so you can go ahead and speak. I think you have to take yourself off mute as well. Wait.
Now.
There we go.
Thank you. One of the things that you brought up today that was mentioned in last year's cycle that wasn't into as much detail as it was today is the giving together, the proposal sharing. We are going to be applying for a general support grant this year. Thankfully, Stephen and Tabitha King gave us a grant to be able to purchase our building. We're putting in heat pumps, so forth and so on. And maybe this is something I should just email in. But down the road, what we're looking at is funding specifically for something like a solar array. And I didn't know when there's something like that, because that's a fairly unique thing, that if we were to send information to you, you might be able to figure out what donors we could approach or let know about our request, because we have a proposal from one of the companies already, and it's something we'd like to go after, considering the price of electricity is skyrocketing now.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure if that's what would be the best protocol for that, I should say.
So you mean did you say you're already planning to apply for general support?
The general support, yeah, we're partway through that already with the thing. This is something unrelated to this, but it's such a unique thing that I figured I'd just grab throw a real quick question in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, like that's not something that's going to be eligible through.
Oh, of course not.
Right. So yes, I would contact the staff for your county to see if, and the thing is that, like I said, the donor interests are totally just, individual. And so sometimes we have, odd things that they're interested in supporting, and sometimes something that you would think that they would, we just may not have somebody that is or is looking for something in that particular area or that kind of thing. But so yes, I mean, I would contact your the staff for your county.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. So we have another written question that I'm sure other people have wondered in the past. If your previous Community Foundation grant application was unsuccessful, does that decline diminish your future chances?
No. No, I would say, I mean, I think that, as I mentioned, a decline is a good time to be in touch with staff. So especially if you feel like especially if you're going to reapply with that same sort of proposal, same basic proposal, then that would definitely be a good time to be in touch to find out, you know, if there are, why it was declined in the first place, if there were certain things that were concerns about the proposal, because if there were concerns and they aren't addressed in a new application, then it will likely get declined again. So I would say, like, one decline is not a reason to necessarily just resubmit the same thing. That's a time to contact us. Let's talk about it, figure out what might be a way to strengthen the proposal so that it would have a better chance of getting funding.
Great. The first question I can't answer here, which is, can an organization apply to MCF and another foundation, not MCF, for a grant at the same time and for the same need? And the answer is absolutely. But then the second part of the question is, if we were fortunate enough to be awarded some or all of the requested funds, can we return unneeded funds without jeopardizing future funding awards?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, if, you know, things change, you know, but before you say to us, we couldn't use this, we want to give it back to you, I would say, think of ways that you may be able to spend it that are, you know, with the same sort of intent or purpose that the original funds were awarded for. And so that way, because I would say we like to get money out into the community and for it to be used. And so we don't want to take the money back. Like, that is our last resort, you know, is to take the money back. We don't want to do that. So you would have to, and if you contacted me and said, I want to give you this money back, you know, I would spend time with you to try to figure out if there was a way that you could spend it. That was it, you know, commensurate with, you know, that would be the best thing, commensurate with, you know, what it was funded for. So, and if not, and, you know, then I think I'll still talking with staff about, you know, if there is a change, if it can be approved, you know, because there are lots of ways to spend the grant money, and that would be the ideal thing, is finding an alternative way to spend it and not taking it back. But we can take it back and we won't hold it against you.
Never. I have another question from Nicholas Demore. Nicholas, you are ready to go if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Nicholas. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. You are showing as unmuted, but we can't hear you. So we might be having a microphone problem. I have a written question from Nicholas as well, so I'll read it just in case this was the same question, which was, if part of our request is for general support rather than to fund specific projects, how should we handle the total project budget as stated on the proposal funding section of the application?
So if you are in our current community building, or I'm assuming it's community building, we have branched the application so that if you are applying for general support, you will not be given a project budget, you know, form to fill out. So we've tried to make the application so, you know, it's appropriate for the type of funding that you are applying for. So in the past, I think we had instructions there like put NA or don't fill it out, or so, different things. But for community building this year, we branched it, and you should not be getting that project budget if you selected general support.
Great. Thank you. Nicholas, I went ahead and lowered your hand. If you figure out your microphone problem and you want to raise it again with a different question, feel free. And our last written question we have right now is, if you do get 2 grants for the same focus, can you extend the use to next year's budget?
Say that again. If you get 2 grants,
if you say you submit a proposal to 2 different programs, so 2 different committees, and they both fund you, so now you're double funded, can you roll the funding forward to the next year?
I'd say before you did that, I would wonder if, again, there were ways to spend it, towards that project. I guess it's hard for me to imagine that there wouldn't be, needs associated with that project or with the organization that couldn't be spent instead of just holding on to it. So, because we're making annual grants, and we're wanting that money to get out into the community and be used, in that year. So again, it's sort of similar to that previous question. I would try to figure out ways to spend it. And not just save it. I mean, it may be that the program, lots of organizations are experiencing delays, and so things are getting sort of pushed out, and money is being held onto for a certain periods of time because of those delays, and that's fine. But I hesitate over intentionally holding on to money for an entire year and not spending it. That would not be the purpose of giving that grant. And if that were the case, then yes, I would say, let's talk about how you can spend it in that year.
Okay. So we just got another question in, and it's the last one, and I think it's very similar, but I'll read it in case I'm misunderstanding. So if some organization gets double funding, can it be returned and used the same year for another grant proposal for that same year? So if an organization is double funded, can we take the funds back and give it to another proposal?
Wait, I'm sorry, say it again.
If an organization gets double funding, can they return it to us so we can give it to another grant applicant, I think is the question.
Oh, you're very nice. If, like I said, if you applied to 2 different programs and you got double funded for the same project, and you really that's all the money you needed, you have all the other money and you don't need any more money for that project, then that certainly is a possibility. I can't promise, because of the timing, that it would immediately go to another project that year, just because of the process and timing of things and when that would happen. So that's certainly a possibility. And that's very kind of you.
It is. And on that good note, that's it. And our timing is perfect. 12:59.
Yay!
Great cooperative effort, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.